Okay, I was going to greet everybody, but right before we went live, Gage goes, "Oh no!" So now I got to know. Why are we saying "Oh no"?
I was still making my thumbnail for my video.
All right. Well, welcome to a brand new episode of the 5280 podcast on the MHRT network. I'm your host, Bo Nix, alongside my co-host, as always, Cameron Park Pooh and Gage Madrid NFL. How we doing, gentlemen?
We're doing well. It feels like we can be free, now that we don't have the old man in the group.
We are unsupervised.
We are unsupervised.
No babysitter tonight.
Yeah, and what's good is that we know for a fact that Glenn is not going to miss mandatory minicamp, or in essence, like the mandatory shows, if you will. Right? Like we know that he's not gonna, do one of those types of stunts.
I mean, he might.
He could.
All right. So before we get into the obvious main topic with Courtland Sutton, there are a few little things that we need to talk about. One, we want to congratulate Dalton Risner for signing back with the Vikings. Congratulations. Still miss you in Denver. Obviously I'm not going to cheer for the Vikings, but I'm glad that you got that.
Should we do the skull?
No,
the skull?
We're not going to do skull.
What?
Hey, we're not doing skull. It's the same thing. But yeah, congrats to Dalton. Just frozen.
It's gone.
There we got it.
What a perfect freeze. What a perfect time.
Well, it's in and out, but I'm fine with it. I got to do this for like a minute, so it's fine. It's all good. Again, unsupervised, no babysitter tonight, so have fun, Glenn. All right. So a couple more things. One, Troy Franklin signed his rookie contract, so he's officially under contract for the Denver Broncos, so that is good. There's also this talk about the Broncos doing work on what was Dove Valley, which is now Broncos Park, powered by Common something.
Yeah, I didn't get a
Common
chance.
Spirit.
Yeah,
Common Spirit. I was going with Commonwealth. It's like, no, that's not it. And then
Knowledge.
I was going Common Knowledge. I was going through, and it just wasn't getting there.
Common Law Wife.
Common Law, and like initially they were saying that it was going to be closed and we'd have to have training camp somewhere else. Yeah. But they ended up saying they're going to wait until after training camp and then work on it. So we're still going to have training camp with fans on the berm.
Which makes a ton of sense. Yeah, and as far as Troy Franklin, it ties off the entire draft class, as you mentioned. And, and one thing, and this is like something that I've noticed with Sean, and actually to even George Payton's credit to a degree, it really feels like they're making it a priority to get the draft classes signed early, right? And I really like that. I mean, I feel like so often, and I kind of think of it was one of the Bosa brothers, and I don't know if it was Nick or Joey. I want to say it was Joey, but like there were times where like they would hold out, or like they would not sign their deal even heading into like OTAs or possibly even in a training camp. So I just love the trend that we're finally in, and to be honest, it's not just Bronco related; it's also NFL related. You're seeing a lot of players' contracts, draft contracts being finalized and finished, like even before some of the rookie minicamp or even into OTAs or finalizing OTAs. So I really like the fact that we are not, listen, we're guys. We have a tendency to procrastinate probably better than anyone.
I don't know what you're talking about.
So, but I like the fact that, that we're at least, not procrastinating and actually getting it done.
Absolutely.
Well,
absolutely.
Normally I try to procrastinate as much as possible, but again, babysitter Glenn always makes me do stuff when I don't want to.
Adult supervision.
But he's not here, so it's fine. we'll get into the other training camp OTA stuff later because there was some things going around about potentially canceling. We'll talk about that in a minute. But I kind of want to continue with the contract thing that Cam was talking about with Troy Franklin having signed. Obviously, we've talked about Courtland Sutton a lot and his contract situation and him not being at OTAs, not being at minicamp, any of the voluntary workouts. Now, initially, to us, it's like you haven't, your play hasn't been up to your current contract. Why are you wanting a bigger one? You know what I mean? But then it came out, and it wasn't really anything from Courtland. Like, he didn't say anything, but it was talked about that Jeudy signed with the Browns and is now making more than Courtland Sutton. Do we think that's the reason why he wants to get paid more? I mean, has he played better than Jeudy? Does he deserve to get more than Jeudy?
Go ahead, Gage.
I would say so.
Yeah.
I would definitely say that he deserves more than Jerry Jeudy. Just to this point, he's produced way more than Jerry Jeudy has in his career. I think Jerry Jeudy is a bigger name than he is anything else. He has had his flash moments, but on the whole, he has not been a productive NFL wide receiver. And if he can go out and break the bank with the Cleveland Browns, then I don't blame Courtland for thinking that there's some other team out there, Pittsburgh Steelers, that might be willing to fork over that kind of money for him.
Yeah, and I think here's the thing, and this is something I think we briefly mentioned when we talked about Courtland Sutton, and it bears repeating. We're not in that room. Like, we're not in the room of Courtland Sutton. We're not in the room with Sean Payton, and I think we've mentioned it a few times. If there is at least a conversation that was had, pre-planned, about Sutton missing voluntary minicamp and him probably being there for mandatory minicamp, then the speculation, the unnecessary speculation of him possibly skipping mandatory minicamp, it's a moot point at that point. Because if he shows up, he shows up, right? And but as far as the contract is concerned, that's where it gets a little bit frustrating because, here's a guy. But that has his contract where he's basically here for this year and next year, which to another team would probably look very appetizing because you get him for this year and you get him for next year, and it's a much lesser contract than the fairly recent Justin Jefferson deal that was recently signed. And to a degree, Sutton and every single wide receiver that hasn't signed an extension yet is affected by the Jefferson deal. But the thing is and it's been said numerous times, Mike, I know I saw you on Twitter having this debate a little bit with someone on Twitter about it, but the facts are the facts is that he may be worth more money than Jeudy, but he is certainly not worth maybe the money that he's asking, which is maybe a little upwards of 20 million or 30 million. And the thing with me is, like, I know the rumor that came out where he said, I only want like probably a $2 to $3 million raise. Look, let's be real. If it was that big of a deal that he would want 2 to 3 million, like, I mean, like, that to me is like the Broncos would have probably have already done that deal if it was probably 2 or 3 million more. I guarantee you he's probably at, and guarantees a strong word. Just ask Charles Barkley. But guarantee is like, I just feel like, you're probably talking about upwards of the 20 to 25 range for him. And that's when you get into pretty steep territory and a really rough conversation with Courtland Sutton.
See, and this is one of the reasons why I'm not a fan of the Browns. Like, they overpay players all the time. Deshaun Watson. Like, they reset the quarterback market, and what did they get out of him? Nothing. So it's not that I don't want Courtland Sutton to get a raise or a extension. It's not that I don't want him to get paid what he should be getting paid. My issue is get paid when your play reflects the amount that you're making. Like, as of last year, he was the 19th highest paid wide receiver in the NFL. And I don't think there's a lot of people on that list ahead of him that you could say he had a better year than him, he had a better year than him, he had a better year than him. I don't think there's many you could do that to. So I think that for what the team has been getting from him, and again, a lot of this is not his fault. A majority of it is coaching and quarterback play.
Mm-hmm.
Like there
nothing
we can do about that one. But at the same time, like there were still some route running issues. There were some drop issues. Like there were things that could have been taken care of by Courtland that weren't. So I'm not saying that he shouldn't get paid more. I'm saying that we should get another year for him to have a quarterback that can get him the ball so he can show that he should get paid more.
Yeah, and I think that that's the other area of this that makes it puzzling, but also that it's funny how we say 50-50 with that, and here's a 50-50 wide receiver, but but you're totally right, Mike, in the sense that when you look at the situation with Courtland Sutton, you have to look at it in the objective point of view, which is, you're talking about a wide receiver who contractually and the way that he's performing, he's not performing up to the contract, or up to the maybe up to the contract is a really strong word, up to a raise. Like that's really the conversation, right? Is he's not really performing up to the level of having a raise, I don't feel like, or at least, even if it was a small raise, at least something like that, maybe a small raise. So, and that's why I say if it was a $2 to $3 million raise, it probably would have already been done by now. And the reason why it's such a catastrophic, I feel like, idea for Sutton is also too, the Broncos can move on from him because of such very limited guaranteed money. So that's why, like, for even Courtland Sutton, it's a dangerous game, I feel like, to even be playing with the whole, I need a new contract type of deal, because you have players like Troy Franklin now in the room. You have players like Josh Reynolds, especially, into that room. And especially in this day and age of, you don't last very long, if you will, in the NFL, you're also easily replaceable. And I think that to me is the other level of this Courtland Sutton talk that is probably at least, bears repeating a little bit. And that is his production for what we saw. I mean, he can definitely duplicate that and be a little bit more impactful with better quarterback play. But the production that we saw is easily replaceable by a guy like Josh Reynolds. You just got to say that. Like his production, for what it's worth, is easily replaceable for a guy like Reynolds to come in and replace that. And that's why a lot of people, not just, possibly us, have even speculating it, but that's a reason why people feel like Sutton could be not just a trade candidate, but a, cap casualty, if you will, for the Denver Broncos.
Yeah, and one more thing, and Gage, you might have thoughts on it, but you look back at the history of, let's just say average quarterbacks. I don't want to say bad. I don't want to say just average quarterbacks. You take a Brad Johnson, right? Good game manager, average quarterback, but Keyshawn Johnson gets 1,000 yards. Like Teddy Bridgewater is an average quarterback. But we haven't seen Courtland Sutton get 1,000-yard season since 2019. Like we've had 4 different quarterbacks in that time span, and it can't all be on the quarterbacks. That I guess that's where I'm trying to go. Is like,
right.
There's 4 different quarterbacks. Other guys have gotten 1,000-yard seasons with average play from their quarterback. It can't just be the quarterback. Mm-hmm. There had to be something going with Courtland Sutton, and maybe it's Courtland Sutton isn't a true number one. And I know we've had this conversation before. Maybe he is just that 50-50 guy. And that's fine. If you want to get paid to be the 50-50 guy, be the 50-50 guy.
That's right.
But if you want to get paid to be the number one guy, you need to be the number one guy. And I don't know if Courtland is going to be that number one guy. I think Mims could. I think Troy Franklin could. But I don't know if Courtland is that number one guy.
100%.
I agree. I will say this. I don't think Denver has their future number one receiver on their roster right now.
Ooh. Really?
Yes.
I think it's now I think I like how Mike phrased this in the sense that you possibly could look at it with Franklin. He's already got the chemistry with Bo Nix. If Bo Nix is the guy, which it certainly seems like, as D-Rock put it, a blue chip head coach in that terms of pairing, like Franklin would possibly be that type of player. But I also think Marvin Mims is a guy that could possibly be the guy you're talking about, a guy who, frankly, I think his route running is actually a little bit underrated. He needs to work on it, I feel like, but I think his route running is a bit underrated in that sense. Like I think he's actually shown, and it seems like even this go around in OTAs, he's actually gotten better with the route running. But we're talking about a player who tracks the ball exceptionally well, like and that's going to suit him really, really well as he continues to grow. And I mean, look, obviously, you don't want to talk too much about Russell Wilson, but that's what made Tyler Lockett such a big weapon. It's kind of funny talking about Lockett. It's a big weapon, and he's such a small wide receiver.
And DK.
Yeah, but it's just funny saying Lockett in a big weapon, and he's like 5'11" or something. But there's a reason why, and it's because he had such a good track of the ball. Like he was a great 50-50 guy for his size and his height. And so I think that, there are candidates on the roster, but I mean, man, you look at some of the class that's even rolling into the draft this year in 2025, but then you even go a bit deeper in that. And certainly there were candidates on the board that are now off the board with the 2025 free agency, but there are possible trade candidates and candidates in free agency that will be bearing watching. Two guys, especially from San Francisco, Deebo Samuel, who actually just the thought of Deebo Samuel, I know he's injured a lot, but the thought of Deebo Samuel with what Sean Payton could do with him it's crazy. And of course, Brandon Ayuk is another one that's going to be worth watching. And T. Higgins, who knows what's going to happen with T. Higgins? Maybe he signs his deal. Maybe he doesn't sign his deal. There are a lot of weapons that I feel like the Broncos are going to go to. And that's why I say, like, obviously the Broncos went out and got Troy Franklin, but there's a reason why, like a couple months ago, I said I would not be surprised if the Broncos actually punted on the idea of adding a wide receiver one this year and actually spent more of their time looking at it and maybe going after a guy this next year, right? And I think the other position that's worth noting, and this is just a very side note on this, is left tackle. Who knows what happens with Garrett Bowles, but there is a certain left tackle that is going to be on the market. And he actually did come from the 2020 draft class, and his name is Tristan Wirfs.
Yeah, that's intriguing.
That could be fun. So I kind of want to take this in a different direction. Like we sit here as fans and we talk about, well, I think this player is going to do this. I think this player is going to do this. I think our offense is going to be this. I think our defense is going to be this. But how skewed is our view of certain people, right? Like, we sit here and we look at the wide receivers. Like, are we fairly judging our wide receivers? Like, are we overvaluing them? Are we undervaluing them? Like, is there anyone that's actually living up to the hype? Same thing with quarterbacks. Same thing with running backs. I mean, for example, you take who's that idiot? Marilat, that idiot off of the Fan, right? Did you guys see that story? That interview?
Don't want to name names. Don't want to name names, but yeah, Marilat. Yeah,
yeah, that idiot Marilat. Did you see what he was talking about in the show he did? Yeah. Where it was, he definitely thinks that the Steelers are going to win the Super Bowl with Russ. Yeah. He thinks that the Broncos are kind of like the Arizona Cardinals. So Bo Nix is like Justin Rosen, and then Shedeur Sanders is going to be Kyler Murray. Like, we're going to draft quarterbacks in the first round 2 years in a row. So I'm just trying to figure out, like, as fans, are we looking at this the wrong way? Like, are we overhyping players and not seeing what's actually going on? Or are certain people in the media just fucking idiots? I guess is a nice way to say that.
Look, I think that fans are naturally going to have a bias towards players that they like, and they're naturally going to view things in more of a positive landscape. I know I try to remove my fan goggles when I bring my analysis because I know at times that can get in the way. So when oh boy, we'll get riled up on this one, D-Rock, trust me. But when I try to bring in analysis, I try to bring it in from a somewhat objective perspective. And so I would say right now that the Denver Broncos wide receiver room is getting pretty fairly rated, at least by myself, in terms that there's not a true number one guy in there. There are several guys that can step in and fill a certain niche role. And hopefully that combination of all those guys together is going to lead to a somewhat usable product in that wide receiver room as a whole. But that's only going to come with time. As far as guys like Bo Nix and that whole stuff that James Marilat said, I think that Marilat tries to stir the pot and tries to poke the bear and tries to generate. Yeah, it is. It's for engagement. But I think that at the same time, though, I think there is a tiny little grain of validity there that if Bo Nix does not pan out this year, the Denver Broncos will probably be in the market for a first-round quarterback in 2025. I don't think that that's an unfair statement. It is going to be very drastic for Bo Nix to become the next coming of Josh Rosen because Josh Rosen couldn't handle, the pre-snap stuff. He struggled identifying the pressure. He struggled seeing coverages, stuff that Bo Nix has already displayed. He's ahead of the curve in that regard. But, yeah, I wouldn't disagree that if Bo Nix completely goes out there and shits the bed, then the Broncos will be looking for a quarterback in 2025. But the other stuff that he said about Russell Wilson and the Steelers, I certainly disagree with that stuff for sure. I think that this is going to be Mike Tomlin's first losing season.
Now, Cam, before you dig in, I want to add something into it, and then you can respond to all of it, right?
Okay.
So we talk about Marilat, right? Whose face looks like an asshole, basically is what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Now, you also go on to NFL, ESPN, and you see the rankings of quarterbacks, teams, rosters, all that. With the rosters, Denver's ranked second to last in roster. With quarterbacks, Bo Nix is ranked second to last. That's why that with Marilat is the reason why I'm asking, like, why are we getting all of these people saying Denver's roster is the second worst in the league? And we're sitting here going, we're going to win 10 games.
Well, I think a lot of the Kool-Aid fans are saying we're going to win 10 games. I think that there's some validity to the idea that they could win 10. Well, we know that 10 is their ceiling. I mean, I think Gage and I and you, Mike, and Glenn have had the conversation before that 10 just feels like their ceiling, but the 7 and 10 I feel like is their floor. But when you look at the whole Bo Nix discussion, that's what makes the discussion about Nix or even roster, when you look at it objectively, such an interesting debate, because if you look at just one position that lifts all boats, that is undoubtedly quarterback. And I think one area where it's at least somewhat fair to have Bo Nix that low, it's because, look, Bo Nix hasn't stepped on any actual football field yet in the NFL. So it is 100% fair and rightfully fair to put him at quarterback 32, 34, 35. I don't care where you put him. The whole point is just that he's not stepped on a football field yet, and everything that we are basing the popularity of or the future popularity of with Nix is what we see from him still as a prospect, right? But what I still kind of come back to, and make sure you guys go check out the show that I did with David Talks Broncos, because I actually talked about this. But like, what makes this so fun is that just in the overall landscape of Bo Nix, what I've always found so fascinating, and I'm sure you guys caught on this, but the one constant feedback that we were getting with Bo Nix were from former players. The media, the analysts, not players, but the media and the analysts all hated, to be fair, the Bo Nix selection. There were probably a few, but Chase Daniel, Kurt Warner, Phil Simms, Matt Sims, Chris Sims, like
Mama Sims, Papa Sims,
who
all
probably,
the Sims.
yeah, but all of the
Meemaw Sims, Papa Sims.
all the former players just raved about, Bo Nix and his fit. Dan Orlovsky was obviously another one. I just raved about the idea of Nix and Denver. And so this was kind of a rare case where rather than kind of listening to the analysts, I actually found myself more listening to the player side of things and understanding the fit and the overall fit of an idea of Nix. Now, I'm still going to reserve judgment because it's still very fair to talk about as the roster is constructed. But I think overall, I don't hate the idea. Now, all this other stuff, talking about Super Bowl and, with the Pittsburgh Steelers, I actually still feel like there's a chance that they can have a winning record just because, you can never count out Mike Tomlin. I agree wholeheartedly with the problems that they possibly could have with the Pittsburgh Steelers. But I feel like, you just can never count out Tomlin. He's got them so well prepared week in and week out as a coach that you just cannot count him out. And then, but as far as this other stuff, like, yeah, there was just a lot of stuff even coming out in terms of Bo Nix Josh Rosen even coming out about his love of the game and other stuff when he was coming out that it was just, it's not a Bo Nix pick. But to what Gage was even talking about is that you always have to have the mindset of you are easily replaced. And if you do not perform, you will be easily replaced. Now, we certainly know that Sean Payton is a bit egotistical, right, with some of the quarterbacks or some of the people that he has on his roster, right? And he wants players that are on the football roster that are his guys, right? So I think it's easy to assume that Bo Nix will be his guy going forward. Now, the other layer to this, unfortunately, is if you look through the lens of Josh Rosen, if Nix becomes a Josh Rosen, is the moment Sean Payton punts on Bo Nix is the moment we are not just questioning the Bo Nix selection, we're questioning the hire of Sean Payton as well.
Absolutely.
Okay. So speaking of Bo Nix and the other quarterbacks on the roster, I don't even want to talk about the Russell Wilson Steelers thing because that's just stupid. People obviously didn't watch Denver at all last year, or they would not be saying Super Bowl. But you had Zach Wilson running first team today. You've had Bo Nix, Zach Wilson, Jarrett Stidham kind of rotating on first team. Sounds to me, from everything I'm hearing, is that Zach Wilson is the one who's struggling the most.
Not according to MLS football.
Well, that's why I have them blocked on Twitter. Jarrett Stidham is probably the most steady, but the most, I'd say, uninspiring. I guess I'll go with that. And then Bo Nix. I think it sounds like Bo Nix and Stidham are like even with each other. Like Bo Nix is having his rookie things, which of course. But I think at this point in time, if you had to choose between Stidham and Nix, you still go Nix because it's close enough.
I think so because obviously Jarrett Stidham's not going to be your quarterback of the future. He's out there basically looking like the second coming of Teddy Bridgewater in terms of being very safe, conservative, not wanting to take risks, just taking what the defense gives you.
Decision.
I think, yeah, exactly. Yeah. I just think that at the end of the day, Bo Nix is going to be the guy who, I mean, you drafted him 12 overall. You're not going to sit him, especially when he's 24 years old, has played 60 games in college. He doesn't really have a whole lot to benefit from by sitting at this point. So unless Bo Nix displays that he's just flat out not ready, then you play him despite his flaws over Jarrett Stidham.
Yeah, and and I think it's kind of like if you're playing in like the first round of a golf tournament, and you got players that are just alternating, like every few holes, like that just feels kind of like how things have gone with probably the quarterback competition early. But we know that if it's rather steady, right? If it's rather steady, going forward. You're probably gonna want to give it to your first round draft pick because of the overall potential and the lift of the room. It is a fantastic shirt. It is a fantastic shirt.
That is an A-tier shirt.
It's a Big Deborah shirt. She had too many little Debbies and became Big Deborah.
But no, yeah, it's I think that just that's what makes the quarterback conversation so fun and interesting is that will the Broncos make that curious decision of having 3 on the roster? And we'll be talking about that ad nauseum. But the way it's trending right now is that if Zach Wilson continues to play that he's been playing under a much, more detailed oriented and truly like hard-nosed head coach and Sean Payton, if he can't, work the rigors of that, he's not going to be on the roster come week 1, and they will carry 2 quarterbacks or maybe even 3, but another third quarterback on the roster. But they will probably carry 2 quarterbacks heading into week 1, but it's not going to be Zach Wilson. It's going to be you almost have me saying Teddy Bridgewater.
Teddy Bridgewater, I heard.
Yeah. Jarrett Stidwater.
Jarrett Stidwater.
Now, the question to that is, I was watching the interview with Sean Payton today, and he said that they had been working on the Zach Wilson trade for a month and a half before it actually happened. So even if Stidham is out playing Wilson, you still think that they would let Wilson go before they let Stidham go?
It depends on the performance.
It's
a performance business, man. So but I wouldn't be surprised.
I was watching Andrew Mason and Cecil Lammey before the podcast, and they said that the interception Zach Wilson threw today is one that's going to live in infamy with the media for a very long time. It was one where he threw it off of his back foot. Jaquan McMillan was right up in his grill on a nickel blitz, and he just kind of lollipopped it up, and it ended up squirting into the hands of PJ Locke. It was about as ugly of an interception as you could get. He's scrambling. It's not even worse than Drew Lock. This dude is scrambling during 7-on-7 passing drills. This is the time where it's okay to throw an interception because those are the drills where you learn what you can and can't get away with in game. If you are scrambling and not willing to be testy during a 7-on-7 skeleton drill, then I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah. But we know.
You look at it, right? And you can almost see the poor coaching that he had and the poor offensive line play he had while he was in New York.
Yeah.
Like if you're already scrambling on 7-on-7s, there was something seriously wrong with either the offensive line or the coaching or both.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes the layer of them working on for about a month. The Zach Wilson trade, at least to a degree, somewhat interesting because it may lead us to believe they really do like the talent level of Zach Wilson to where they want to make him be basically, and it's funny saying this, but the Sam Darnold, which is funny to say that.
Unsupervised!
Is that basically you want him to probably be your Sam Darnold, which is funny to say that because, they both came from the Jets. But I think when you look at Zach Wilson, and especially when you look at it from Sean Payton, that's why I would much rather them go through this situation, evaluate it as just a player development side, keep him in the roster, don't play him, but just develop him, make him, get his confidence back, have him truly be, where he's at the point mentally and even physically to that degree, so that come next year, it's one of the reasons why I'm saying like 3 quarterbacks on the roster, because then at that point you're talking about him not impacting at any point in the game, but just understanding, the situations and understanding the Sean Payton stuff for about a year. What I even now, granted, I'm not trying to compare this to Davis Webb, but the thing that made Davis Webb such a very unique story with the Giants, and just even so much with anything else, was just he was a sponge for everything in that room. And I think Zach Wilson needs to basically be a leech off of Davis Webb and use him as, a sponge, pun intended, and really just take in that information and learn and grow and develop and be the quarterback he could possibly be next year. So that come next year, when Stidham is off his deal, it's actually Wilson who's the backup and not Jarrett Stidham at that point.
Yep. And in fairness to Zach Wilson, he was doing that on the Jets with Aaron Rodgers last year before Aaron went down. Unfortunately, that plan completely went down the toilet 4 snaps into the season. Wilson was being that sponge. He was trying to take in pretty much everything that Aaron Rodgers was willing to give him. And it looked like Rodgers was willing to be that mentor, willing to be that guy to take him under his wing. And again, that just all got wrecked 4 snaps into the year. If Zach Wilson had gotten that full year to sit behind Rodgers and learn and develop and get better while not having to see the field, then I think we could be having completely different conversations about Zach Wilson right now. And Zach Wilson would easily not be a Denver Bronco right now if he had indeed developed in that light, had things not completely gone south with Rodgers tearing his Achilles.
Yeah.
So kind of just a quick overview of OTAs. Obviously, today was the last day that the media was going to be covering OTAs. But was there anybody that stood out? Anybody that failed? Any new injuries?
Obviously you take it for what it's worth, because it is OTAs, and but especially for rookies or anybody that is on the roster bubble, or anybody that you feel like just has a lot to prove this year in 2024. That's where you're kind of looking at some of these guys. But I mean, who knows? There actually might end up being a guy where he blows up, as far as like a player that, like, I'll just use it as an example, like Pat Surtain, right? Because people were making the same comments about Nikola Jokic at some point in the regular season. It's like he actually looks better than he did in his MVP years, right? And so like there's times where like a Pat Surtain could come into camp and he's just tearing it up, and he's so like that could be the case too. Where I kind of come to it is, look, it's really hard to ignore right now. And we didn't get a chance to say his name with Courtland Sutton in terms of making him expendable. Really, the guy that really could possibly make Courtland Sutton expendable is Devon Bailey. The stuff we're hearing about Devon Bailey right now is not something you're seeing from an everyday 7th-round draft pick. Like, he is coming in, playing like a veteran, playing really well. I see the Casa Bonito, the Nick Bonito's playing really well. That's, from everything we're hearing, seems like Javonte Williams has looked pretty good, at least as far as health is concerned. Baron Browning got a shout out today. Baron Browning got a shout out today from Sean. Also, it seemed like maybe Ben Powers and Mike McGlinchey are actually looking pretty well as well. So that is, and if you're specifically a offensive line hater, that's something you would like to hear. Is that McGlinchey and Powers seem to be doing quite well so far.
I think we had a couple people running on the sidelines, right? Caden Stearns,
Brandon Jones, Greg Dulcich,
Levi Wallace.
Yes.
Yeah. Technically, I was gonna say technically.
Oh, and PS2 had the leg thing, right?
Yeah. And Estime, obviously his, the knee and everything and stuff like that. But technically,
we hadn't actually had a chance to cover that on this show, I don't think.
Yeah.
What?
The Estime injury.
Oh, I don't know. We all canceled last week, so I don't remember what the last thing we talked about was. Life.
But yeah, just in case you guys have been living under a rock, Audric Estime had a little knee scope. Nothing major, but he is going to be out until the start of training camp.
Yeah. And as far as Greg Dulcich, yeah, he was on the side. Actually, he's been running on the side his entire Bronco career as of late, as crazy as that's. And speaking of and speaking of people who have actually been standing out, Lucas Kroll might be a name you want to file away, as far as the tight end is Lucas Kroll.
Speaking of tight ends, since D-Rock brought it up,
yes.
What are we doing with tight ends there, Gage?
Well, I think we just answered it. It's going to have to be Lucas Kroll who steps up. If Dulcich continues to have these health issues, then Kroll's going to have to step up and basically be Greg Dulcich. He's going to have to fill that big slot receiver role. He's going to have to be one of the inline tight ends. Troutman, by default, is probably going to end up being the number one tight end once again, which I'm not thrilled at all about. But if Lucas Kroll can showcase that growth and that development, and thus far, seems like things have been good based on what Sean Payton said. Sean Payton's not one to dish out compliments very easily, and he was very complimentary of Lucas Kroll. So right now, it's looking like Kroll's going to be that guy who really steps up into that mold. Maybe one of the two undrafted free agents, Dylan Leonard or Thomas Yasman. But I'm still going to maintain that the Denver Broncos have the worst tight end room in the NFL.
For certainly one of, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I looked and tried to find one worse, and I honestly couldn't. At least with other ones like the Washington Commanders and the Carolina Panthers, they have a clear-cut number one tight end. The Commanders have the ghost of Zach Ertz, and then the Carolina Panthers have Jatavian Sanders. But outside of that, man, I don't know. Denver's tight end room definitely leaves a lot to be desired, and I'm very concerned about how things are going to shake out ultimately in that room. Because when you're basically depending on a former undrafted free agent to develop into a starter for you, that's when you have some trouble.
Do we know if there's anybody out there on the wire that we can get and bring in or no?
That's one of the things.
What I wanted to bring in was Logan Thomas. I wanted to bring in Logan Thomas, but the 49ers just signed him.
Well, and that's what makes this particular draft, even free agency, a little bit puzzling in why they did not go out and target a tight end. And maybe that's where the lack of capital, kind of plays into a little bit. But where it gets really sad is, have you guys checked out the 2025 free agent list for tight ends?
Oh, no.
It is booty cheeks. The only one that is
rolling, absolute booty cheeks.
Like I was gonna roll it, but I gotta click on stuff and find it. It's not like it's sitting right in front of me.
There is literally only one player on this list who is really good, a great fit for Sean Payton. But will he be available? I have no idea. And that is Pat Freiermuth with Pittsburgh.
Oh, you think they'd get rid of him though?
Who knows? I mean, Russ might actually frustrate, Freiermuth, and Freiermuth want to leave town. So
let's go get us some Okuwebanam back.
Yeah, but it's really the only one. Freiermuth is really the only one who's going to be a free agent. So, and maybe they target the tight ends this go around in 2025. But yeah, it's a scary proposition because, and I don't want to bring too much of a flashback into Bronco fans, but we should not rely on the fact about a Julius Thomas type story with Lucas Kroll, right?
Does he want to come back and play?
Maybe. I mean, based on the career arc that Julius Thomas had, he actually might be successful.
Didn't Julius Thomas get a medical degree or something like that?
I think so.
Yeah.
But I think you can see the talent. You can pretty clearly see the talent of Lucas Kroll, and him being a pretty solid pass catcher. So there's definitely some potential there, with Kroll. And you certainly cannot rule out the idea of them developing players in terms of Sean. It's just you can't hedge your bets on the fact that Lucas Kroll could possibly be that guy. So here we go again. We're talking about looking at this objectively, right? So us objectively are looking at it from the undrafted, point of view in the sense of Lucas Kroll. It seems things are trending to this idea that Lucas Kroll is going to probably end up being your maybe your most impactful tight end on the roster, but he's still undrafted. And that's why one of the reasons why Gage has been, looking at the idea of Logan Thomas. And, when you're undrafted, it keeps things a very fluid situation. And to the other point, we're not in the room. We're not in the Sean Payton room to know really, he really loves and believes in Lucas Kroll to be the impactful, tight end on the roster. Or, dare I say it, they actually have a plan for Greg Dulcich. And that's the thing is if it actually happens and the Broncos actually get what they need from, and it was actually Glenn who said this in the chat, so kudos to Baldy. But if it actually happens that Dulcich and Kroll actually have meaningful plays and snaps with the Broncos, that's actually a beautiful thing for the Broncos, because they will have now had at that point what they should have had with Okwuegbunam and Dulcich, which is two explosive tight ends in the passing game.
Yeah. I mean, maybe we can trade for the Raiders. Like, they've got a bunch of tight ends, first-round picks. Just saying. That's going to be the headline for the Wild Wild West tomorrow. Raiders have too many tight ends. Broncos have no tight ends. Chargers have no receivers. And Chiefs can't stay out of jail. That's the whole title of the show. Pow! There you go, Rich. Speaking of,
there's no way Michael Mayer is going to become available, but I would love Michael Mayer in Denver. I would not say no to that.
No, for sure.
Speaking of jailbirds, let's talk about Brandon McAnus, Brandon McMuffin Top, whatever you want to call him. Leaves the Jaguars, gets signed by the Commanders, and then is released by the Commanders because he has a lawsuit against him as well as the Jaguars for, is it sexual assault? Sorry, SA. I didn't say that. SA. Bad stuff. We'll go there. Because of some things that happened on a Jaguars team flight with some stewardesses and some alcoholic beverages, which is a whole nother story on its own.
Mm-hmm. Moral of the story, we have Will Lutz now, and Brandon McManus has moved on. And I don't want to play the I told you so card with Brandon McManus, but I told you so. I mean, Brandon McManus has been on the decline ever since he's been with the Broncos at the tail end of his career, and there's a reason why they moved on from him. I hate to even say this because they're also talking about an unsung MVP at one point for not just the 2015 season, but at one point or a few points even with the Denver Broncos. I mean, there was a point where with the Denver Broncos, he was probably the best kicker they had ever had since Jason Elam, certainly at one point. But, he's an attention seeker. He's an attention seeker. He's on social media a lot. He engages with fans. He brings it upon himself. You hate to say it. And it's a distraction. He has created this distraction himself. He's put himself into really bad situations as of late. And there's a reason why he is not a Denver Bronco, and Will Lutz is a Denver Bronco right now.
Yeah, I definitely think that this is going to prevent him from signing with any other team. But the other wrinkle to this whole thing, and I'm pretty sure, I think Glenn is the one who told me about it. The NFL banned alcohol on team flights. There was alcohol involved on this team flight. So now what happens?
You're talking about a kicker who may not be kicking in the NFL anymore.
Right, but there's going to be penalties for the Jaguars if there was alcohol on that flight.
Yeah. Yeah, if that's against league policy and they do indeed find that there was alcohol consumption on that flight, then absolutely. This isn't the first time where I've seen alcohol stir up issues on team flights. I've seen that be an issue before, but this is probably the first time I've ever heard of players sexually harassing stewardesses on the plane, which is obviously repulsive and unacceptable. We shouldn't have to sit here and say that, but if Brandon McManus, if these allegations are indeed true, then in my opinion, Brandon McManus has lost his privilege to play in the NFL. He deserves his day in court. He deserves to have the truth come out, whatever that truth is, as do the potential victims in this situation.
100%.
But if these allegations are true, then Brandon McManus has lost his privilege to play in the NFL, plain and simple.
And this is the other layer of it, which is it is a black mark on not just Brandon McManus, but the NFL as well. Brandon McManus, and people may or may not remember this, was a NFL PA representative. You heard that right. Still is. He's an NFL PA representative. So, yeah, exactly. So his actions, whether it becomes true or it doesn't, become true, if I'm the NFL PA, I'm having a hard look in the mirror about revoking his title and responsibility of being a part of the NFL PA, because those actions or anything that he brought upon himself is not reflective of, what the NFL PA is about. Obviously, the PA has been under scrutiny for something other than that, like in terms of player contracts and, stuff like that, in terms of CBA. But this kind of stuff, I guarantee you, they do not want anything like that attached to, their big, massive brand like that.
And to this point in time, they've been very quiet.
And I do want to bring up that I do see everybody's chats. I do see the questions. I'm not going to pull those questions up.
Yeah.
Just in general, not anyone in particular, just in general, because I don't want to get into a whole conversation about he said, she said, what happened here, what happened there. We don't know. The whole story hasn't come out yet. We're just talking about what should happen if said allegations are true. And if they are true, then Brandon McManus shouldn't play anymore. And if there's alcohol on the plane, Jaguars should be, I don't know, fined, lose a draft pick, make the owner sell the team. I don't know. I have no idea what the repercussions would be. But as far as like specific questions of why didn't this happen, I'm not going to pull those up. Just so you know.
Yeah, and it's an if. It is definitely an if, Ray. It is definitely an if.
Yep. We don't know what happened. We maybe never will know exactly what happened, but we can sit here and at least say, hey, if these allegations are true, if they are true, then X, Y, and Z should happen. That I don't feel like that's out of bounds, but us saying this is not a indictment one way or another on how we feel about this situation. Yeah.
And if anything, just to bring it back, this should explain or maybe give credence to the idea of, why we were, excited to the idea that Will Lutz is a Denver Bronco probably right now, and not Brandon McManus.
Well, and he was money last year.
Yep. I mean, he was. And I think it's interesting when there's people on social media saying, well, Lutz was mid. Dude, if there was anybody at some point in a long list of players who were deserving of a Pro Bowl as a Pro Bowl alternate, Will Lutz was, I would venture to guess, highly, highly up there. There's a reason why kickers, call for what it is, are the highest scoring player on an NFL roster, and they don't get necessarily nearly the credit that they deserve. And Will Lutz probably should have been in the Pro Bowl.
But that saying, sometimes your first impression is going to be your lasting impression. And what was Will Lutz's first impression as a Denver Bronco? He missed a field goal and missed an extra point. And if he had made his kicks in that game, we would have won that game and we would have ended our loss streak to the Las Vegas Raiders. But outside of that game,
I was going to say, I was gonna say, and dang it, if he nailed that onside kick, we would not have this problem.
God, seriously. I mean, but with Lutz, if you take that game away, the dude was freaking money.
Yeah.
He made almost every kick asked of him. Another miss that he had, I think he only had 3 or 4 misses on the year. One was a 56-yarder at halftime in that Patriots game, and then another long distance kick. He was extraordinarily reliable, and I don't believe he missed an extra point after that one in Las Vegas. I could be wrong, but Will Lutz, automatic, has history with Sean Payton. Peyton's comfortable with him. Mike Westhoff's comfortable with him. Ben Kotwica's comfortable with him. And that's what matters at the end of the day, is that those 3 people are comfortable with him.
That's right.
And kind of picking up where Cam was talking about Pro Bowl, honestly, does the Pro Bowl even matter anymore? And we'll obviously get into this before we get to the season, because that's a whole nother conversation. But not making the Pro Bowl, is that really a bad thing? It's a popularity contest at this point.
No, it's just we have a conversation a lot about Pro Bowl snubs. It's not just us; it happens nationally.
Now there have been some All-Pro snubs, and that's worse.
But I think that in terms of Pro Bowl and recognition, there's at least credence to the idea that he probably should have been recognized for what he did there.
In fairness, though, when you're a Pro Bowler in the AFC at kicker, you're gonna have to deal with somebody else, and that's Justin Tucker. So it's pretty hard to get a Pro Bowl nod when you've got guys like Justin Tucker in the AFC, and there are other really good kickers in the AFC too. So when you think about it, the Pro Bowl is basically a popularity contest, and there are much more popular names out there than Will Lutz. He maybe would have gotten it if he were still in the NFC.
Yeah, or an alternate or something, and that would be opera singer Justin Tucker, by the way.
Yes, did you see that video?
Yeah,
better than some other videos. Stay in the kitchen. Okay, so let's. It's a joke. It's a joke.
This really has got
right. So, kind of continuing on with the NFLPA. And some things that are happening behind the scenes, it sounds like the NFLPA is trying to negotiate no longer having OTAs or voluntary activities. They're proposing to get rid of the voluntary off-season activities, OTAs, and starting training camp early, like in June or July, and then just having a longer build-up to training camp and extending training camp. Is this a good idea?
Well, technically, if it started in July, there would not be a change because they already start in July.
Well, but it would start earlier in July. So
I'm
just ramp. No, I know. So
I'm being a smart aleck.
Ramp it up.
I'm being a smart aleck. That's all. But I just
this is what happens when we don't have Glenn, right?
This podcast goes off the rails.
I mean, it usually does anyways, but this one's been like this. And usually it's only one way.
If there is a clip that is that sums it all up, it would be
this.
No. It would be the clip from Up with Doug where he goes squirrel.
That's the one.
That would literally be the clip. Anyway, but I think as far as just the overall OTAs and everything, I know Courtland Sutton's probably smiling ear to ear. Anybody that has really skipped the voluntary workouts or anything are probably smiling ear to ear. Knowing the fact that possibly postponing that and bumping training camp. I definitely I think injuries would be something to at least monitor. Now, granted, injuries are a very fluky thing anyway, and it is all predicated upon how well they are training and how well they are preparing their bodies, for training camp or the mandatory mini camp that's probably going to be happening in June. I can see this being where the injuries do become more frequently, but again, it still just plays into the part of how well will their bodies be holding up. I think if it happens to where it's the first year, right? If it happens in the first year, that's where you could possibly see a high level of injuries happen. Is in the first year, or maybe in the first couple of years, because it's an adjustment period. It's it's an adjustment for coaches, for players. So that's where I could see the injuries actually happen, more frequently. But if it happens and they actually like how it is going about, that in years and years go by, I can actually see a lot of players actually going, oh, you know what? I actually like the idea of the fact that, there's no, voluntary OTAs and stuff like that. Because for one, from a player perspective, at least at that point, you're at least taking away the opportunity for the voluntary and them spending a lot more time with their family. And I guarantee you that they would be taking that, over, the voluntary, mini camp or stuff like that.
But there is a converse side of that. And Ben DiNucci, former Broncos quarterback, actually tweeted that this could put younger players who are trying to make the roster. DiNucci, shout out Brandon Pernin. But this could put younger players who are trying to make the roster at a little bit of a disadvantage, like undrafted free agents and roster bubble guys, because it could limit the total amount of reps that they get. So there is a bit of a downside to this that I feel like does at least have to be taken into account.
Well, and I think that if they're talking about doing this, there needs to be something added in there like rookie minicamp or OTAs is mandatory for rookies or undrafted free agents, or anybody who wants to go can go, but it's only mandatory for, like, because I think the rookies still need to have everything that's been in place currently so that by the time we get to training camp, they're up to speed. So I do think it's a good idea to give the veterans more time off. I don't see the injury thing. Like, why would you get more injuries with an extended training camp?
Lack of practice.
Yeah, but at the same time, like, this isn't a Vic Fangio thing, right? Like, you don't callous your body so you don't get injuries. So it's not like more practice equals less injuries. That's not how that works.
Spreading it out and not going a very extended period of time without doing real football activities, that could lead to a certain lack of conditioning, and that could lead to injuries.
But the longer rest would kind of negate that, wouldn't it?
I don't know. I think that would cause staleness, and it would cause that would cause a lot of guys getting more stiff and just being more prone to injury.
I think we need to bring Mario in on this kind of conversation.
Well, I think, and obviously Mario knows way better than us. I think, to Gage's point, and maybe Mario would actually agree with this, if it is to where they aren't, a part of OTAs and it is a bit stale and they're not really working out, one of the biggest things and the biggest injuries that you will see in camp or even in training camp will be the cramps. Like, because like, especially that, I mean, and granted, those are harmless to a degree in terms of, in terms of longevity, but in terms of the right now, there's probably no worse feeling than getting a cramp in a, 90-degree weather at Dove Valley,
No, Broncos Park.
So
powered by common law or whatever it is.
Common knowledge.
Now, my thing is, I get where you're coming from, right? Like, having that time during like June, July, where they kind of ramp into training camp makes it so that their body's more ready, right? But at the same time, like, you're a veteran player in the NFL. You're getting paid a lot of money so that you're able to play at a certain level. Like, at some point, if they're going to expand training camp and get rid of voluntary OTAs, you have to trust that the veterans are going to be able to, like, ramp it up on their own at home so that they're ready to go by training camp.
But there's only a certain amount of that you can mimic in a home environment. There's a lot of that stuff that you have to, quite frankly, be in an NFL regulated environment in order to be able to mimic. There's just certain drills that you can't really do unless you have access to a football field and a bunch of other players. And certainly guys could work out on their own on like a high school field or whatever, but there aren't necessarily going to be a complete amount of players that are proactive and committed to doing that. And yeah, you'd like to hope that these guys would be pros and would take care of their bodies in the off season, but that's not necessarily a guarantee, especially I feel like with some of these younger players.
And it's especially too, injuries are a fluky thing. Say it again, like injuries are a very fluky thing. So, but I think it definitely would be, worth looking into the more frequent it is happening. So, but again, it's all about how well they're, at the end of the day, like it's all about how well they are taking care of their body. And if there's one thing we do know about not just NFL players, but just sports professional athletes, is for the most part, they do take care of their body really well. So I would venture to guess that, at least they are going to be getting a briefing if this ends up happening, that they'll end up getting a briefing of this is what you can and cannot do. And I do think even then, and I like how Gage brought this up in the terms of working on their own, I think, because at one point, I want to say, especially during COVID, there was a point during COVID where there was a certain limit to where you can and cannot work out with your team, like on your own in terms of practices, like during COVID and everything. But I feel like, if it goes to the point where they do extend the period with training camp and eliminate the voluntary OTAs, I think you will see a little bit more of the idea of them, to coin the Peyton Manning workouts, if you will, but just them basically working out, on their own and orchestrating, workouts with their team and wide receivers and possibly even getting some offensive linemen into the mix as well. So really working out on their own, so that in that case, depending on how often they do it and not capping the amount that they do it, getting to the point, so that once training camp is right there and it's the start of training camp, you do limit the amount of injuries that you have.
Well, and one of the other points that was made was if you move the offseason to what's being proposed by the NFLPA, that makes it a lot easier for the NFL and the NFLPA to agree on an 18-game season, because you have that extended time after the Super Bowl for players to kind of get ready. So I almost feel like this is kind of a ramp up to an 18-game season. Now, there was also a talking point about an 18-game season where if it did happen, there'd be 2 buys.
Which is what it should be. Is
Absolutely.
if you do extend it to 18, there has to be 2 bye weeks. There absolutely has to be 2 bye weeks.
And especially if you're doing international, like, because they're going to be doing a game in Germany, right?
Yeah, Germany, London. I think they're doing one in Mexico
Brazil,
too.
Spain in 2025. They're really trying to push this whole international market for the NFL. There's even been reports about maybe Australia or Dublin or Paris. There have been a lot of new cities that have come up in the international games, and I think that international football is very much here to stay.
Okay, so let me ask you guys a question on that, kind of off the rails. If they do end up creating multiple teams internationally, how does that work? Do they just make a new division and then they got to figure out how to bring like teams from the States to play the teams internationally? Do they just have like a separate league where it's international and then NFL and then they play each other at the end of the season? How do we make that work?
It's a fun conversation because I think it depends on who you ask, because let's just say for the sake of argument, we asked Damani Leach. Leach, as we know, actually has experience with the NFL International, right? Like that's one of his backgrounds is NFL International. And I do probably think there have been conversations of them wanting, or not wanting, but of the possibility of them having a professional team, abroad, right? Like in London or, Dublin or Germany or, Brazil or something like that, right? London would probably be your most logical choice considering the amount of times in the first. That was the first one that they, kickstarted it, right? I actually look at it. I think that was the first one that they, at least in terms of a lot more popularity, London was like the one that they kind of started it all, if you will, and then everything just sort of followed suit after that. But I don't think we actually see professional teams overseas. What I actually do think you see, and this is actually where it could be pretty cool in terms of the NFL's popularity and truly being maybe the most popular sport in America or business in America, having a Super Bowl having a Super Bowl overseas, doing a Super Bowl over in London, or doing a Super Bowl in Dublin. I think that would be really interesting because then now you're appealing to the grandiose of the national stage or the worldwide stage, if you will, for the Super Bowl, and truly making it the greatest sporting event, known to man.
That would be tough logistically, I feel like, because a lot of individuals who get to attend the Super Bowl are corporate sponsors, guys who can actually afford those tickets. There's some like league sponsored attendees as well. And I think that would be maybe a bit of a tough sell for some of these US based companies not wanting to send all their guys over to London for the game and stuff like that. So that's one side of it where I think that could be a little bit of a logistical hurdle. And then another logistical hurdle as far as bringing a team over is it would be very difficult to get a full 53-man roster plus a practice squad. It'd be very difficult, I feel like, to get all those players to want to live overseas and move their families overseas and have to commute between the US and the UK or whatever country they decided. And it's not just them, it's coaches, support staff, all of that stuff. There's, what is it, like 200 people that are in each individual building that are required to make the team operate on a day in and day out basis when you include players, coaches, and support staff. So that is very logistically difficult. I think the closest that we're going to see is teams like the Jacksonville Jaguars doing what they already do and playing multiple games per year in London, one home game, one away game. We could maybe see a team, I'm using the Jaguars because they have probably the most established market in London. We could see them maybe play like half of their season in London when their stadium in Jacksonville is undergoing renovations. That's something that maybe we could see. But as far as a team full-time operating outside of North America, I don't see it. I think if we do see an NFL market get established outside of the United States, as far as a full team, Toronto, or some other Canadian city, maybe Mexico City, but that's also a very long travel time. I think it's like a 6-7 hour flight or something like that from New York City to Mexico City. Don't quote me on that, but I do think that there are travel logistics that would prevent a team from operating outside of North America.
And hold on. So there's one more aspect of this that I kind of want to bring in, and this is not insulting anyone. This is not a knock on anyone coming out of college. But if you add teams to the NFL, are there even enough players of the NFL caliber that could make these teams competitive?
Yeah. Well, maybe, yeah. I think here's the thing: is the more you add teams, and this is a massive bunny trail to a degree, but the more you add teams, is the likelihood you'll also be talking about, and I'll just use this as an example, but the more you're talking about the UFL as a G League or a D League for the NFL, and actually as a minor league program, which I actually do not hate that one bit, because if there's one thing as far as undrafted free agents that aren't really signing with an NFL team, they can, or undrafted free agents that are with the team and part of a practice squad, they probably could go and get their development in with some of these teams and develop well, with a team that is, organized by the Broncos or, whoever their team is.
Yeah. So you're talking G League, you're talking AAA ball, that kind of thing.
More so NBA actually, like D League, G League, and not necessarily baseball in a sense because there's far more teams at that point in AAA, single A, double A, high A, whatever. But like as far as just in general of that, I think that it just depends on like just the overall like how they kind of like. I just think that as far as if you look at it from a whole. It just depends on the player development of it.
I do think that they would be able to field competitive rosters with expansion teams because of the high amount of talent in the UFL. There's really high-end football that's being played right now in the UFL, and I do feel like there is a high enough level of players where you could add a couple of expansion teams and still field competitive rosters.
And I am glad that the XFL and the USFL merged. It makes a whole lot more sense. Like the level of play went way up.
AJ Martinez is the front runner for MVP. Go Big Red.
Yeah.
Oh, there's our weekly Nebraska reference.
There it is.
Right.
There it is. Anything else that you guys want to talk about? Anything we have not covered? I know we got 2 weeks worth of stuff that we can cover. Anything else I missed?
Not that I'm aware.
I think we're good, man.
That means I covered all my bases. That's good. So that's going to do it for us young folks. If you want to see the old man, he'll be here next week with us. I think we'll be supervised. So it'll be a lot more tame. So make sure you check that out. Thank you so much for joining us on the show. Make sure you check out all the other shows on the network as well as Broncos Syndicate hosted by Gage Madrid. Make sure you go check that out. Mainly Broncos hosted by Cameron Parker. And then I'm on this one and the neighborhood, which obviously isn't happening until the Broncos play, but I'm excited. So make sure you go check those out. And the easiest way and the best way to support all of our shows is to give it a thumbs up, subscribe. It's absolutely free. Doesn't cost you anything. Takes about 10 milliseconds. Yes! The fireworks! It's the best and easiest way to support every single show on the network as well as the network itself. So make sure you do that. We appreciate you. We love the Broncos. We love talking about the Broncos. We'll see you guys later. Peace out!
Fast lane when I pass in the street. Bag of money in the passenger seat. Simcoe's been asking for me on the road from the west to the east. Way up, I might never come down cause the coast racking up the flame out. So high, I might never come down. So what, this is my life.